it seems that the majority of what I do in any given week is make tops. I sell bags of 100 of these to local toy stores, and I have to make my rounds every month or two. And every weekend when I do an art market, I'm taking out my lathe and I'm making these in front of them, and I have to have some extras available because a lot of people they'll buy the one they make, but they also want, a half dozen more for their nieces and nephews. So what that means is I process a lot of 6/4 hard maple into little squares. And today I want to talk about the importance I've discovered of having, if you're going to be using a table saw, of also having a jointer, or at least something that will perform the function of a jointer, such as a hand plane. So when I process my lumber, I typically cut it into sticks. I joint one edge, so I have one nice straight one. And you can do this with a hand plane. You can even do it on your table saw if you have a jointing rig, which will clamp a board down and run it through the grooves. But you end up with one straight edge that's going to reference your fence very evenly. And if I want to get a perfect square, how many of y'all would do this? You raise the blade up. You drop your board right next to the blade, making sure you don't press against it. Then you bring your fence over to that board, lock it down, and now you know that when you push through your work, you will end up with a consistent square on every side. And you push it through once, you're okay. You push it through again, you're still making a square. You push it through again. I mean, it's a repeatable process. I'm here to tell you, theoretically, the way I just did it, which is the way every person I know that woodworks would do the same operation, we are all wrong. And it all comes down to bound tension in the wood. Rarely will you ever cut into a board and it's not going to move just a little bit. I mean, to have a perfectly split wood board that goes straight down all the grain on all four sides, and to have it where the tree wasn't in either a windy environment or was slightly tilted, or maybe you have a branch coming off of this side of the tree so it's bouncing over there. Whatever the case, generally there's going to be a little bit more tension in one spot of your board than the other. So if you have a board, you have 100% tension this way, okay? If you were to slice off just one little bit of this board, well, you still have maybe 90% tension. This big board is not going to move that much. But this board over on this side, you just removed 90% of its tension. You took it away. So there's a better chance that that is either going to cup one way or cup the other way. Whatever. Now this might only be a minute amount, but look at what's happening on the table saw. You are now shoving the thin portion of that board, the one that's getting 90% of its tension removed, and you're wedging it between the blade and the fence. So any kind of cupping action has to be dealt with, either the board coming off the fence a little bit or the blade bending, which sometimes happens if you're working with a contractor saw. You get a little vibration. It could be you're putting so much side pressure that you're getting a little deflection from the blade. You're also getting a lot more friction, and you get a lot more burning. But most of us woodworkers, when we're focusing in on running a board through our table saw, we're focusing on this distance right here, between the cutting edge and fence, because we got the idea that as long as that portion stays the same throughout the cut, at least our board will be the same thickness all the way down. So we kind of ignore this section back here, which means if you've got a little bit of a cupping action this way, it's going to come off the fence a little bit here and a little bit there, putting pressure on the back of that blade, which can be scary, because guess what happens when that happens? That's why a lot of us put that riving knife back there so that the pressure gets put onto the riving knife and not the blade. But the effect is still there. It's harder to push through your saw, it can be a little bit more dangerous, and even with that riving knife, there's always a potential it could rise up, because remember, the back side of the blade is lifting the wood, the front side is pushing it down, so that's why we that's why we rotate the boards that way, so it's always hopefully going down into the bed of the table saw. But what's even scarier is, what if it moves the other way? What if all of a sudden your gap comes in the center and you're pressing against the blade that way? Well, for the most part, we aren't talking a lot of movement with most boards. Most of the time we choose our lumber fairly straight grained. We know what we're doing, especially in cabinet shops. Let's go look at our blades. For the most part, most modern table saw blades are carbide tipped. And if you look at the carbide, they are a little bit wider than the steel itself. Which means that once you raise up the blade all the way up, it is a tad bit thinner here than the curve made by the teeth, which is exactly the same situation with a handsaw. That's why we bend out those teeth on the handsaw to create that set. Well, that little bit of gap will allow just, a few thousandths of an inch of a distance coming off of their fence into this section as you cut along. So that's fairly safe. But it's not ideal. Now, the proper way I should be cutting these little 1-inch squares is to run my board through my table saw along the fence, just removing the outside so that they are parallel. Okay? That's not going to remove that much tension. In fact, it's probably just going to be like 0.5%, because all you're doing is turning one edge into sawdust just to parallel them up. And then every single time I move my cut up piece off, I should move my fence over 1.5 inches, or that 6/8 inch, or whatever it is, the thickness. That way, this board that's running along the fence and in between the fence and the blade, well, it's going to have most of its tension available, so that you're going to get a lot less cupping for the majority of the board. Now, eventually you will get down to the point where you've removed so much that the wood might bend on you. But it's a lot easier dealing with a big board when you're doing that one. The problem is that introduces potential human error, because I now got to measure this fence moving perfectly all the time. Theoretically, that is the best way to rip long boards consistently on a table saw if you're looking for 100% safety. Because if this outside board of the long one cups, bends, or whatever, it is not being squeezed between the blade and the fence. It has a place to go. All the air over here. Now, is that what most of us do? Hell no. We're going to set that fence up once and make consistent cuts. And that is why I feel it's so important to have easy access to some way to joint those boards. Because that 90% that you left off of there, it will move a little bit, and each time you cut off a little bit more, it'll move a little bit more. A minute movement of that first cut might not be that big a deal, but you need to judge that on that first cut and be very wary of it. And every other few cuts, I like to just come over to my jointer and make a quick pass to straighten up that larger board so that it doesn't accumulate the air, the curve. The end result is just a lot safer for me, because each subsequent curve inducing that the saw causes is eliminated, and I'm starting back with a nice straight cut. Plus, the end product is generally going to be straighter in the long run. So, just like when you have a lathe, it's almost somewhat mandatory that you also have a bandsaw, just because those two tools work in conjunction so much Having a table saw pretty much means you're going to need some way of straightening a board quickly and easily. And for me, that's easily accomplished with a jointer. You could do it with a hand plane, but it's a lot more work. And I gotta batch out these tops. Since I was talking about my techniques for prepping tops, I want to talk about probably the absolute best educational value there is for wood turning, especially if you are in the lower states of this country. SWAT, Southwest Areas Turners Association. I've been going to it for probably 8 or 9 years now and consistently, and it's enjoyable every single year. It is the second largest wood turning symposium in this nation. They invite instructors from all over the world. They have 8 or 10 rooms, I always forget how many, but they have 4 to 6 classes in each one of those rooms each day, and you can pick and choose what instructors you have available. Plus, they have a huge instant gallery where all those instructors will bring some of their best work to show off, but everybody that comes to visit might bring 1 or 2 out there. They also do a great Beads of Courage where hundreds of little boxes are donated for cancer children. And they have a very, very nice vendor section that comes year in, year out. It's just top notch. And it's less than $200 for 3 full days of educational value. You just can't beat it. So if you're in the Texas area, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Arizona, all that area, look into SWAT, Southwest Areas Turners Association. You're going to want to start signing up now, and if you're going to use a hotel room, you want to book them now because they book up pretty quickly. If you get a chance this year, head out. You won't regret it. I mean, it's so much inspiration, it's so much education, and it's inexpensive for what you're getting. Oh, also, they feed you all 3 days.